I live alone in a house near the edge of the forest, at the northern end of town. That year, I had Halloween off from work. I wasn't going into town, so I decided to stay in the village and hand out candy to the kids. I filled a glass bowl inside the house with sweets wrapped in orange and purple paper and turned on the small lamp on the porch. This town, though old and quiet, came alive a little on Halloween nights. The first group of kids showed up around 8 o'clock. A tiny witch, a Spider-Man, and a little ghost in pajamas that said boo. "Trick or treat," they yelled. I smiled and gave each of them a handful of candy from the bowl. "Have a scary night," I joked. They ran off laughing, disappearing into the dark road. Then a few more groups came by. Each one seemed quieter, more tired. By 9 o'clock, no one stood under my porch light anymore. In the distance, at the end of the street, I saw an orange light still glowing in front of a house. Probably the last one open in town. "That's enough," I muttered to myself. I turned off the lights and thought about watching some TV inside. But just then, the doorbell rang again. The chime echoed through the house. A short, sharp ding-dong, then silence. I paused for a moment and looked at the clock. It was past midnight. Could there still be kids out this late? In small towns, everyone usually turns in early. Maybe it was a group running late, or a prank. I picked up the bowl again and walked toward the porch. I pulled the curtain aside from the window next to the door. No one was there. The other side of the street was completely dark. I cracked the door open slightly. Cold air brushed my face. The space under the porch light was empty. The stone path below the steps was covered in leaves. Even a single step would have been loud. But there was nothing. Probably a kid ringing the bell and running off, I thought. But then, I heard something. At first, it was faint, maybe just the wind. But then, it grew clearer. Heavy footsteps on dry leaves. They were coming from the garden path. I looked out again from the edge of the curtain. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I could make out a shape at the end of the porch. A silhouette. A tall man. He wore a pumpkin mask over his head. I couldn't tell if the faint light coming from inside that mask was real or just an illusion. But it glowed. "This place is closed," I called, my voice shaking. There was no reply. The man stood there a moment longer, then slowly turned around. His footsteps echoed again with the same slow rhythm. He walked down the garden path and vanished into the darkness. I stayed frozen for a while. It must have been a joke. Maybe the neighbor's kid or something. But the uneasy feeling in me didn't fade. I'd just go to bed and forget this stupid night. But as soon as I stepped into the bedroom, a metallic sound came from the backyard, and I froze. The sound was sharp and clear. There was only a small shed in the back, and its old door had always made that same noise. I stood still. Only a thin glass door separated the kitchen from the yard. I wanted to grab something. My hand found a flashlight on the counter. I took a deep breath. "It's probably just the wind," I told myself. When I reached the window, I parted the curtain. I pressed the flashlight button. The yellow beam lit up part of the yard. Wet leaves, the old wooden fence, the stone path leading to the shed. Nothing moved, but I didn't feel any calmer. I took another step closer to the glass, and then something flashed in front of the beam, an orange reflection, and then the mask. My heart almost stopped. Right behind the glass, just inches away, that pumpkin mask was staring at me. Its eye sockets were pitch black, and the slit of a grin seemed to tremble. But the worst part, a faint light was flickering from inside it, as if a candle burned within, or someone was holding a light from inside. The flashlight slipped from my hand. Each time the beam crossed the mask, that glow shifted, as if the face was moving. Holding my breath, I backed away. For a while, nothing happened. No sound, no shadow, just the creak of the wind rocking the chained swing on the porch outside. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Nothing stirred. Then, from the darkness came a faint rustling, something sliding over leaves. I tried to steady myself. "Enough," I whispered. I went to the door. The lantern still lay on the floor, its light flickering. I picked it up and moved toward the porch door. I reached for the handle. Even then, a voice inside me whispered, "Don't open it." But I couldn't stop myself. I slowly opened the door. Cold night air hit my face. I looked out at the dirt road in front of the porch. No one was there. But in the mud, clearly, there were footprints. I stared at them for a long moment. The cold air burned my lungs, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I raised the lantern's weak light to follow the trail. It led across the yard, along the wall of the house. Then it stopped, right at the base of the wall, fading into shadow. It was as if someone had stood there, waited, then disappeared without a trace. My throat was dry. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing strangely back at me. No answer. I had to go inside. I shut the door, bolted it, and pulled the curtains tight. When morning came, I stepped outside first thing. Only on the edge of the porch, where someone might have sat and then stood up, there was a mark left on the damp boards. And right in front of it, something small lay on the ground. A piece of pumpkin, dried, hollowed out, but still faintly glowing. Even in daylight, that orange shine hadn't faded. I reached out a hand, then stopped myself. I closed the door and went back inside. I never lit the Halloween lights again. That night, the air carried the sharpest scent of autumn. My shift was over, and I loved walking back to my small house outside town, where almost no one lived. That walk always washed away the noise of the day. As I left the town center, the streets grew quiet. The Halloween crowds had long gone. Only a few houses still glowed with orange lights, their plastic cobwebs fluttering softly in the wind. Under the dim light of a doorway, a small child clung to his mother's hand, holding his bucket tight. Maybe they were chasing the last few pieces of candy. For me, the night was over. I just wanted to reach the silence of home. Everything was perfectly normal, until I reached the end of the street. At first, I didn't notice. For a second, I thought it was just a dark shape, a mailbox, maybe a shadow from a tree. But after a few steps, I stopped. Someone was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, right under the streetlight, a figure dressed completely in black. It didn't move. It didn't look like a child's costume, nor anyone I knew. It wasn't wearing a mask, or at least I didn't think so. It was as if even its face had been swallowed by the dark. Maybe someone was just playing a joke. Maybe it was a teenager taking Halloween too seriously. I quickened my pace a little, but a few seconds later, I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was my own echo. Then I stopped. The street fell silent. I started walking again, this time faster. I caught my reflection in the window at the corner. The figure had changed direction and turned onto the same street as me. My heart started to pound. No one usually walked in this part of town, especially at this hour. When I reached an intersection, I crossed to the other side just to stay away. But it changed direction too. At that moment, something inside me sank. I passed a few more houses. The streetlights flickered, some dimming, some dying out completely. I glanced back. The figure was gone. Maybe it had stayed behind a fence. Maybe it had turned down another street. I took a deep breath. In that silence, even my breathing sounded too loud. Just as I began to calm down, I heard a metallic clang close by, like a trash can lid slamming shut. That familiar sound of someone rummaging through garbage. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the dark. Trash cans, wet leaves, a broken pumpkin lantern. But no one was there. I moved the light around a bit more, then switched it off. My heart was racing. Keep walking, I told myself. When I turned onto my street, all I could think about was reaching my door and hiding under that soft yellow light. My house was a small 2-story place, its white paint peeling a little. There was a tiny lawn in front and a worn wooden porch. In the evenings, I always leave the porch light on. It's the only thing guiding me home. That yellow lamp was still glowing now. For a moment, the sight made me feel safe. I almost ran the last few steps. My footsteps echoed on the porch boards. With trembling hands, I pulled the keys from my pocket and reached for the lock. But then, something changed. It's hard to explain moments like that. The air suddenly turns cold. Sounds vanish. Time bends a little. Your body knows something's wrong before your mind can catch up. I turned around before opening the door and saw him. The figure was no longer on the sidewalk. He was standing on the grass in front of my house. The moonlight faintly outlined his body, but his face stayed completely hidden in shadow. There were only a few meters between us. He didn't move. He just tilted his head slightly, as if listening or studying me. I froze for a few seconds. Then panic hit. I turned the key, pushed the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. I locked the bolt, set the chain, and tried to breathe. I went to the window and peeked out. He was still there, standing on the grass, completely still. I grabbed my phone. The reflection on the screen showed my trembling face. I thought about calling the police, but it felt absurd. What would I even say? There's someone standing outside my house on Halloween night? They'd never take it seriously, but that figure hadn't moved an inch, as if he knew what I was thinking. Finally, I called. When someone answered, my voice caught in my throat. Yes. There's someone outside my house. They're not moving. I'm not sure if it's a costume. My address is... Just then, the figure lifted its hand. The motion was slow, deliberate. It was holding something white, a card, or a piece of paper. A second later, he tossed it toward the porch. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He just turned and walked away, into the darkness at the end of the street with slow, steady steps. I watched him go. Under the moonlight, he faded until he was gone completely. I hung up the phone. My palms were sweating. I paced around for a while, then finally gathered enough courage to approach the front door. I listened. Nothing. Cold air crept in from under the door. Then I saw it, the white card. It lay on the porch, right under the light. I opened the door a crack. Cold air rushed in. I reached down and picked up the card. On it, in neat pencil handwriting, was a single line. A great costume for Halloween. The police arrived 20 minutes later. When I opened the door, the card was still in my hand. They searched the yard with flashlights. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone. Only that white card, damp and stuck to the porch boards. One officer looked at it, then at me. "Probably a prank," he said. "People get carried away on Halloween." Last Halloween, I was home alone. My family had gone out of town that week. They were supposed to return the next day. The sky had been gray since morning, and by evening a light rain had begun to fall. The kind that never stops or quickens, just continues quietly in the background. Our house sat on the edge of a small town. Nights here were quieter than in the city. So quiet, It sometimes felt like you were floating in a void. The brief excitement of Halloween had long faded. Earlier that afternoon, a few kids had stopped by in their costumes, shouting "trick or treat" and grabbing handfuls of candy. I'd left the candy bowl on the porch with a small note attached. "Help yourself." It was around 10 o'clock. To pass the time, I decided to go down to the basement. There was an old couch and a small working TV. Years ago, my dad had planned to turn it into a game room, but it was never finished. I pulled the couch forward a bit and turned on the TV. An old black and white movie came on. Men walking down a rainy street, neon lights flickering in windows. It was strangely calming. About half an hour passed. I was just lifting my coffee when I heard a short, sharp noise from upstairs. I froze. At first, I thought it was something outside. The wind, maybe a branch tapping the glass. But the sound was clear, as if it came right from the middle of the living room. I paused the movie and listened. Nothing for a few seconds. Then another sound. This time clearer, like a footstep. I sat completely still. The house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "It's just the wind," I whispered. What else could it be? But even to myself, I didn't sound convinced. I waited a while longer. Nothing, just rain outside and the occasional gust of wind. Then, right when I started to relax, came another sound. Softer, closer, as if someone was walking lightly across the carpet. I held my breath. The sound was upstairs, right in the middle of the living room. I reached for my phone and opened the dial screen. But as usual, there was no signal in the basement. Old townhouses rarely got reception down there anyway. After a moment, I gathered my courage and headed for the stairs. I climbed slowly, counting the steps. The third one creaked, just like always. Halfway up, I stopped and looked ahead. The hallway was completely dark, but the orange light from the street lamp outside slipped under the front door, drawing a thin line across the floor. As I stared at that line, something happened. A shadow moved through it. A short, distinct, human-shaped shadow. I don't know how long it lasted, but I saw it. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Then I backed down the stairs. When I reached the basement, I shut the door and turned the lock. For a while, I just listened. The sounds above, footsteps, came again. Heavy, slow. The boards creaked one by one, then silence, a long silence. Only the rain outside, the water running through gutters, the wind brushing past the walls. But underneath it all, I could still hear breathing. My hand found the phone again. Still no signal. If I'd been upstairs near the front door, I might have had a bar, but down here there was nothing. After a while, a faint click came from above, this time from a different spot, as if right beside the door. Then silence. A long, suffocating silence. I don't know how many minutes passed. Only the steady rhythm of the rain reminded me that time was still moving. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe half an hour, maybe 2. Time stretched and warped in the heavy air of that basement. The rain kept falling, sometimes slapping against the walls with the wind. The light bulb's pull chain swayed slightly, though I didn't know why anymore. At some point, the footsteps stopped completely. The whole house went still, inside and out. Only my heartbeat remained. Even that sound scared me now. I sat there in the middle of the basement, on the edge of the couch, clutching my phone with trembling hands. Finally, I gathered enough courage to move toward the stairs. I lifted the phone, thinking if I climbed a few steps, I might get a signal. Still nothing. I took a few more steps anyway. I looked up toward the hallway, at that thin line of light under the door. Checked the phone again. 1 bar. Barely, but it was there. I called the police right away. It was almost morning when I finally heard sirens outside. When the police arrived, I went upstairs. The front door was wide open, swaying slightly in the wind as leaves blew inside. One officer shined his flashlight on the lock. "Was anyone inside?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I just heard noises." They searched the place. Every room was empty, every window closed. Nothing was missing, no damage anywhere. But someone noticed something. The lock hadn't been broken. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant the door had been opened. With a key, a chill ran through me. Because I knew where that key was kept. For years, we'd hidden it under the flower pot on the porch. Only someone in the family knew about it. One of the officers asked, "Have you told anyone where the key is lately?" I couldn't answer. All I could think about was that night, and that shadow gliding silently across the line of light.